Hi, folks. Welcome today on one more episode of the Supply Chain Show. We have a very exciting guest. He's the CEO of a BidOps, who make the software of the strategic sourcing. Today, with Edmund, we will talk about how to overcome the challenges in executing sourcing strategies, right? Especially, I would say, precisely strategic sourcing strategies. So, what are the top three challenges and how to overcome those challenges? So, this is the key theme. I'll be asking detailed question in between. Of what I know from Edmund and the team, they are doing a fantastic job bringing the technology and their experience in terms of strategic sourcing into play and doing some really exciting stuff. So I'm very excited to have them on board. I'm not sure how prepared Edmund is, and I'll be requesting him to have some demo of the product because that's something that I'm very excited about, right? I'm recording this video and that will be available on my YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please write down in the comments box and I'll be asking Edmund. So Edmund, welcome on board. So please, do you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Muddassir, thanks so much for the opportunity and to interview. My name is Edmund Zagorin, founder and CEO of BidOps. My background is in strategic sourcing, primarily helping large multinationals and healthcare systems find the right suppliers at the best price and to get better value. I'm a process person. Our whole founding team is, and we love to help teams that are doing process transformation, business transformation, really see the power of not just automation, but artificial intelligence in actually getting better quotes faster. And that's really kind of the North Star of our company from a metric standpoint. That's just a little bit of background about me and the rest of the BidOps team.
No, again, thank you for the introduction and thank you for taking time in joining me. Much appreciated. So I think before we start the conversation and jump into the topic of strategic sourcing, let's answer the first basic question: how the strategic sourcing is different from purchasing. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, great question, and comes up a lot, especially when business leaders are creating some of these organizations maybe for the first time. Now, of course, any business that produces physical goods or materials, unless you're pulling it out of the ground or getting it out of the forest, or you're raising the animals yourself, you are, generally speaking, buying some materials. And so all of this falls under the header of buying. But purchasing is often considered to be more transactional. And so there is a business need. Someone in the organization needs to obtain a material or a service. That generally generates a requisition that goes to a purchasing process. The buyer then selects from the available suppliers' catalogs or offerings, and then creates a purchase order. An invoice is sent, and then the transaction generally goes through a true-up process, which is either a three-way match of the invoice, purchase order, and shipping, to actually be reconciled with the master data at the end, and that kind of concludes the purchasing transaction. Strategic sourcing is, while it falls under the general category of buying materials, it's a very different process. When you're doing a strategic sourcing process, you are generally at least considering the possibility that you might purchase the good or service from a supplier configuration that's different than the one that you have. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to use a new supplier, but it might mean that you buy different parts from different suppliers if you have two or three that are approved for your organization to choose from, or if you have multiple production sites. And so that process is often broadly characterized under the letters RFQ or RFP. And it involves soliciting quotes, an understanding of the supplier's capability and qualifications, matching that against business requirements and service levels, and then ultimately making a contract award at the line item level. And so when you're putting the line items back into the system after a strategic sourcing process, you should know all of what you're buying, a general idea of how much you're buying, and of course, you know, what the price is given your needs and requirements.
Yeah, very detailed and nice explanation, Edmund. Thank you very much. Uh, Before I move to my next question, I just want to differentiate. So the word strategic sourcing, I feel, is generally very much associated with the medium to, let's call it, big corporations, right? The big corporations have this, you know, dedicated strategic sourcing team. They're going out, finding strategic suppliers, doing RFQs, you know, developing suppliers and everything you've explained. So if we scale down that thought process, so if I just focus on, you know, let's call it a local distributor, right, or a small and medium-sized enterprise, so how they can really think like a big corporation and do take advantage of strategic sourcing, while they are, let's call it, small and to medium-sized players. So what do you think about that?
I think that it's a good point to raise, and I would say that from my perspective, strategic sourcing is a great business function to cultivate, whether or not you have a dedicated team or dedicated person for it. Just to give you an example, BidOps is a relatively small company, you know, compared to the spread. But we run strategic sourcing processes internally when we're, you know, just as an example, we a couple years ago decided we were going to get a CRM system for our sales team. And we made a list of requirements. We went out and evaluated a number of different solutions. We compared the results and ultimately made a decision. Now, that's a relatively small process, but it is a strategic sourcing process because it contains all of the relevant components. And so I would say, however big you are, it is always good to create options for yourself in terms of what you're buying and to understand what's out there in the market. Because that can create value. You'll often get a better price. You might get better service. And in some cases, you may find parts or materials that you didn't know existed when you were doing the engineering of the product or of the part. And that can actually be beneficial and give you a competitive advantage. So I think that in general, yeah, more common for larger companies to have strategic sourcing teams, but I think the process really can be used by anyone.
No, thank you very much. Very good answer. So keeping that in mind and giving your experience, and you know, you've got a company who runs around the strategic sourcing. So what do you think? What are top 3 or top 5 challenges companies during phase when they start the journey of the strategic sourcing, or already on the journey of strategic sourcing, but you know, they still have to face those challenges, you know? So what's your top 3 or top 5?
Yeah, I think I'll list just kind of the top 3 very quickly, and then I'll dive in with a little bit more detail. Mm-hmm. The top challenge that we see strategic sourcing teams facing, which is not surprising, by the way, given that many of the frameworks for managing this are kind of a project management approach. The number 1 challenge is prioritization. The number 2 challenge is managing many projects at once. So one person could be engaged in many RFQs, each of which has many parts and many suppliers. And so there's a lot of complexity. And then the third challenge I would say is understanding when the project is complete or how to measure success. And I know, Dr. Muddassir, you're a very metrics focused guy. You like hard data and numbers, and so we can dig into that a little bit later in the interview. But that actually is a surprising challenge, given that in a lot of categories, there is a feeling that specific KPIs should be used for specific types of products and services. And of course, if you are managing a strategic sourcing team, you want all of those numbers to roll up into a top level dashboard so that you can kind of manage at an executive level. And of course, if all of the numbers are different, rolling them up can be challenging. So I'd say those are by and large the top challenges that we see for strategic sourcing teams.
No, that's pretty good. I think we will cover the third one you mentioned, which is the project successful completion. But let's focus on the first and the second one, right? So I mean that's pretty normal. Most companies run with a quite lean team. Many people have a lot more priorities. But if I think about selfishly speaking, that's more like a internal organization issue than anything else, right? So what I was thinking is, so if we think about more from the external perspective, right? So think about external factors which could be challenging. So can you maybe mention one or two which would be, if I go out and let's take an example right now, PPEs, right? So I've just recently seen the study that PPEs right now, or the development of PPEs has become one of the top 10 priorities for the businesses to focus on when it comes to development or sourcing in general, right? So if I own a company, I want to go for a PPEs to keep my employees safe. Where should I start? I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and we see lots of bid ops customers that are creating PPE bids, creating and also, I should say, not just running bids, but also building supply chains. So this is localizing supply in specific countries or specific regions, and understanding what their portfolio looks like more broadly. So generally, if you're starting a strategic sourcing project, I would encourage you to take some time with the business customers first and understand what their needs are. So ultimately, procurement is a service partner to the business, and it's super important to understand not just the specifications in the abstract. And I think procurement professionals tend to come from an operations background and often have an engineering mindset. And so it's important to go further than the specification and actually understand from the business partner's perspective, not just what they're looking for, but why. We've seen that in PPE, especially that in some cases, if let's say for masks, if N95 is a hard requirement, then that has to be the limiting factor. If it's more ply count and they're looking for cloth masks, or they're able to actually combine multiple products into a solution, then that can be helpful in creating more options. I think that the next step after that is clearly market research, looking at suppliers out there, understanding the landscape of specifications, and then comparing that with what you've seen with the business partners and say, what options do we have as we're sourcing this? And then really, I would encourage everyone to, for a mental model of a sourcing process, really think about it like a pipeline, and have different stages in the process and move suppliers with their different capabilities through that pipeline, because that's going to make it a lot easier to figure out what tasks are required and where every supplier is at in the process. And if there are bottlenecks, like a supplier can't meet a specification, or there seems to be some misunderstanding or miscommunication, or very simply the supplier doesn't know what the next step is, and so they haven't taken it, it's very easy to see that and to gain visibility into the process. And so the value of visibility is really just keeping the trains moving on time. That's when we see strategic sourcing processes get stuck, it's often because a supplier has an unanswered question that they're not sure. It's usually technical. So they're trying to understand what the requirements are and what the spec is in order to submit the best quote. And they don't want to submit a quote that is too high for risk that they might lose out on the business. So providing that flow of information early on in the process, both with the business partners and the suppliers, I think that's critical for strategic sourcing to be a really effective, successful partner.
No, I think you explained it very well in terms of how the partnership plays an important role. And I think you used the very word nicely. It's not just about what you wanted in terms of sourcing. I think what is important is the why it's important, right? What is the business need which is driving that, or maybe there's a internal alternative available which we have not think through. And I think you rightly mentioned one of the key showstoppers or the challenges, the technical spec, which do sometimes which we do not or the supply cannot meet. So keeping all those challenges, which I think you explained very well in details, both internal and external, right? And I think the current advent of the technology, right? The machine learning, all the less automation as you talked about. So what are the tools available? So I know you run a company, so let's talk about BidOps. Maybe you want to give us a quick demo and maybe some shows. I'm happy for the guys to have a look on this if you want. So I can give you a sharing rights, multiple participant, which you have right now, I think. And if you want to share your screen, show us some about your product, would be love to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'd love to just to segment this to kind of end with the demo. So
Okay.
if there are any other questions that you want to ask, I'd be happy to answer those, and then I'm happy to share my screen.
So let's ask my other two questions which I have, right? Which I think you already mentioned. As I said, I'm a hardcore supply chain guy. I have hardly, I worked as a buyer, but I wouldn't call myself a sourcing expert. That's why I'm interviewing for people like you to learn, and people can learn with me as well. And I think you mentioned two things very nicely, right? Which is one of the challenges is there's a starting point of the project. You want to go and so for example, I remember a project where we are launching a new product, right? It was basically quite a lot innovation from the base platform we have. I'm talking electric industry, and we were moving towards more, let's call it a more automation / metering solutions, which was not the internal capability. So the management team or the engineering team has decided we're going to go and basically source that capability rather than acquiring it internally, which was a sensible decision, right? But then the process gone so long, and then we become so dependent on supplier that we wouldn't actually know what was the key success factor, right? And so that's my question. So it's two parts of the question. The first part is how you define the KPI of the successful strategy sourcing, which I think, in my view, is different from business to business or product to product. It's not like inventory that everywhere you have inventory, you measure the inventory performance by days on hand or inventory turns. Your customer service is generally, on time delivery, on request in full, etc. I'm talking about, like, safety is like zero incident, which is pretty standard regardless of the business you are running in or the product you're selling. In my view, strategic sourcing is very specific to the business, right? And the KPI should differ. So if I work in a new company, so how should I start measuring the success of the strategic sourcing? That's my part one of the question. And how you define the starting point and the end point, which was, I think you mentioned, as one of the problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think both really good questions. And in terms of measuring success, it really, I think, goes back to understanding what the business partner wants out of the process, having a clear sense of that. Of course, procurement often serves a couple business partners as kind of core to the function, but there could be other business partners that get involved. And the KPIs that work for, say, supply chain as a business partner will be quite different than, say, marketing as a partner, where marketing might be trying to find a supplier for, I don't know, printed material or brochures. That's very, very different than supply chain that might be trying to, find an inventory solution. However, broadly speaking, there are a lot of commonalities to strategic sourcing processes, and there are KPIs that are useful to keep in mind if you're creating the function from scratch, if you're just getting started, or even if you're very mature and you're kind of benchmarking your performance against others, that can be useful to keep in mind. So one, I would say, is to measure the cycle time of your strategic sourcing projects. How many days does it take? And how long does it take suppliers to submit a quote? And how long after you've received the quotes back does it take you to award the business? Those are all useful numbers to know because it helps you understand what's taking the longest and if there are opportunities to speed things up.
So, Edmund, just so I can understand correctly, so saying one of the KPIs is cycle time when you start the bidding process until you award the business, right? Is this the right definition? Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, cycle time, but it's also really important to separate out the actual quoting process from awarding, particularly if you work in manufacturing. And the reason is because oftentimes the cycle time for quoting is determined more or less by your supplier partners. In other words, the suppliers might take some time to review the specifications, look in their own inventory, and then get back to you. And a sourcing team might not have a ton of control over that. However, the awarding process is a data analysis exercise. And so that's something that you have a lot of control over. And so it's useful to separate those.
Okay.
Another KPI that I think is really important is cost savings. So one of the values that procurement can provide is that if you get more quotes, you often get competitive pricing that can lead to cost savings. And particularly right now, given the economic situation globally, people are looking at ways to save money. And procurement and strategic sourcing can actually be a really good partner for that goal that might be even a goal that the CFO is championing at the company. And so it's an opportunity for procurement to really be a key player in driving towards that business goal. I would also say, however, that cost savings are not enough. I mean, every good procurement process should generate some optionality for cost savings. It's really more about value creation. And when we think about value creation, it's not just getting a lower price for the same parts. It's actually creating more options that are materially better for the business in some way. And so that might be in service levels. It might be in lead time. It might be having a distribution center that is near your production site. Those can all be ways that procurement can create value. And these actually, what we've seen is that if you focus on creating value, you will find the cost savings anyway, but you will have more of a win-win partnership approach. I'll give you a quick example. One BidOps customer was doing a strategic sourcing process for industrial gas that was to be delivered to a number of different production sites in different countries across North America, including the US, but also including Mexico and several other countries. When they actually bid out the line items involved, they saw, and this is common for logistics projects, that there were surcharges associated with demurrage, weekend delivery, and delivery after 5 p.m. And this was a significant amount of spend, and those charges actually accounted for over 15% of the total cost of ownership for that category. Now, what they were able to do is they were able to work with the business partner and see if it was possible for the delivery time to change. And not only did that result in being able to find a supplier that was able to meet those business requirements, but it actually resulted in substantial cost savings and a better deal and really a better account value for the supplier. So that's, you know, true win-win negotiations, especially when it's about pricing, are challenging. But that's an example concretely of how strategic sourcing can create these really powerful win-win opportunities for both the supplier and for the business.
No, excellent, excellent. So my two key takeaways is I think the third one is difficult. One is definitely the cycle time of the sourcing, which you explained into two segments. You know, segregate between the quotation process versus the awarding process, which, you know, fine. And second is the cost saving. I think the third you mentioned, the value creation. I think it's a bit challenging to measure as such, because the value creation is a bigger view, is a longer view, and there are more some direct benefits, some indirect benefits. So there's some relationship benefits. So it's very difficult. And I think you're right. The two, in my experience, are definitely the one which are the key KPIs, because it's strategic. So I think, if I may add, I know you are expert and I'm just a supply chain guy. It's I would call it one of the key elements of the strategic sourcing in the innovative manufacturing business is a time to deliver new products, right? So if you're launching NPIs, which is very common in electronics industry, that you have to launch a new product or new version of your existing product every 2 years or even less right now, then strategic sourcing plays a huge role in finding those right suppliers and deliver it. So if I may add, I would probably add, time to market new product. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of, you know, the general process, I would include that kind of within the cycle time category in general. But the value for manufacturing is clearly realized in the time to market for a new product.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you know, I think you're absolutely right.
Perfect. Right. So at this point, before we move to demo, I mean, come on, the conversation must be interesting. At least very interesting for me. I just couldn't realize that 30 minutes has gone. Right. So we got 17, 18 people still waiting, which can only be a good thing, Edmund. So you're doing a very good job, I must say. Because generally people leave after 10 minutes, right? So nobody's leaving. So that's good. So I have only one question so far from Imran. I think, Imran, do you want to ask your question? Where is Imran? Is he there? I'm not sure. I think he's there. He's there. Unmute. Right. I have asked to unmute. I have unmuted you, Imran. Do you want to ask a question? He's there, but he has got himself in the mute. So I think what Imran was asking is the CAPEX suppliers. So can we use the sourcing strategy with the CAPEX suppliers? I think it's a good question, right? So what do you think?
Yeah, so let me just dig into that a little bit, and then I'll answer the Imran's question. So as many of you may already be aware, bids are often broken up into OPEX or operational expenditure and CAPEX or capital expenditure. The easiest way to think about this distinction is operational expenditure. You're buying it over and over again all the time as part of a continuous process, whereas capital expenditure is more of a project. So for example, if you were going to build a building and you wanted to procure construction contracting services and cement, that would potentially fall under CAPEX as a full project. And if within that building you wanted to bring, let's say, aluminum for a package that you were creating and shipping out, that would fall under OPEX. So CAPEX generally is thought of as being very, very strategic because these are really long-term relationships just by the nature of the project. If you think about building a building, that can take some time. And I would strongly recommend strategic sourcing in the context of CAPEX partners as well as OPEX, because I think that's a key part of the due diligence and qualification process. If you are going to potentially have a partnership with another company that could last 3, 5, 10 years, you really want to make sure that they're the right partner. And I think that the best way to do that is to evaluate their capabilities against other potential partners. And so while it's true that the strategic sourcing cycle will probably be a kind of one-off rather than something that you do over and over again, I still think that the cycle itself will likely result in an overall better decision, and it will help build consensus on your side of the table with the business partners to make sure that everyone is fully bought into the commitment as far as the capital expenditure partner that you're selecting.
No, very good and detailed answer actually. And Imran is writing to me. Thank you very much for the detailed answer. There is one more question from Sambit. Sambit, do you want to ask your questions or you want me to read? I have. Yes, go.
Hello, Edmund. Hello. Yeah, hello, Edmund. My question is about this evaluations of during the strategic sourcing process. Usually, we'll have two-stage evaluations, right? Technical evaluation and commercial evaluation for strategic sourcing. So, how much value should be given to the technical evaluation over commercial evaluation, or which should be prioritized more? That is my concern and query regarding strategic sourcing for the traditional sourcing process. Yeah.
Great question. I would actually say that the organizations that I think are doing the best at this particular thing are actually breaking it up into different stages of the funnel. And so what they're saying is, we're going to determine what is technically usable first. We're going to make that decision. If it does not meet our standards of technical usability, we're going to eliminate that supplier from the process. And then we will move on to pricing or commercial proposal. The reason that I think that approach is better is if there's something where a technical issue could prevent an award decision being made, it really doesn't help to keep that option in the mix, because it can ultimately lead to a situation where you're asking yourself a question, well, if this person has a much better price, should I go with something that might not technically be sound as far as what we're hoping to do? And that's just not a good kind of decision-making situation to be in. And so it's one of the few cases where having more options is not good, actually. So I would encourage, think of it as a two-step process rather than as a weighted, some people give 30% to the technical evaluation and, 50% to the commercial evaluation or vice versa. And then of course there are other steps in the evaluation process. And I actually, I think that's very challenging because it leads to these kind of perverse outcomes where you have a proposal that just doesn't really fit from a technical perspective, but you're still looking at their pricing. And I would say that that's generally not a good fit. However, what I would say, and this is important, is that what procurement's always looking for, and this we hear this phrase all the time when we're kind of discussing with our customers how they're thinking about the process, is an apples to apples comparison. They want to be able to take things that are different and understand the similarities between them and really compare them back and forth. That if you have weighted evaluation criteria, you can do that. And that's something that I would encourage as much as possible. Your strategic sourcing team should actually partner with the business and get their buy-in and say, okay, if you want, just to give an example, if you want a 3-year warranty, how much more would you be willing to pay for a 3-year warranty than a 1-year warranty? And actually get them to give you an idea of that. And then that's something that you can actually bake into the scorecarding process, not just at the end, but actually at the beginning, because you can collect that information up front.
Correct. Yeah. So the collaboration has to be more at the beginning with the business and then with the supplier at the end, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that a big part of the successful process is making sure that once you have the quotes, you're ready to award. You shouldn't need a lot more information, because otherwise you find yourself having more meetings with the business and then more meetings with the supplier. And that's when the process can really take a long time.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, Edmund.
Ambit, very good question, mate. I'm gonna put you back on mute. Actually, Edmund, I think very interesting discussion, and that makes me think of my own experience. So I'm gonna slightly divert the conversation. So sourcing process, as you said, when you have the code, you don't have to really think too much, right? You should be ready to award. I think, yeah, that's for me a pure sourcing. But I've also seen, because our procurement guys, they like certain suppliers, right? They just like, your A-class suppliers. And even for the new projects, they somehow refrain to go and do the RFQ and, start the sorting process. And they rather spend more time in developing their existing suppliers, where they have the built-in, trust. They have a, contract sorted out, commercial terms is there. For them, it's just easier option to basically go and develop a specific technology or whatever capability they want to build, right? So I know it's a slightly indirect question from the discussion, however relevant, right? So how you weigh up the procurement as a strategy of, yes, go through the strategic sourcing process, or maybe develop an existing supplier, which is, I wouldn't consider that it falls under the umbrella of strategic sourcing.
So really interesting point. And this actually comes up a lot, particularly in manufacturing, where you might have a group of suppliers that are really they're kind of part of the family, like they're trusted advisors. You work with them really closely. They might have, some of your molds sitting in their physical location. Yeah. So you're really intertwined as business partners. And so it can be, it makes sense. Okay, we have a new product we're launching. We're going to go to our existing supplier base, and ask them to put together a scope of work. What I would say is that actually that case is where strategic sourcing can add the most value. And the reason is that there is really a lack of data around how the supplier should do this. And so in some cases, the way that sourcing teams with suppliers that are very, very long term, I met with a gentleman at Boeing who mentioned that for their wings, they sign 50-year-long contracts. So some of these relationships can be really, really, really long and deep. And so how, at the end of that 50 years, how do you potentially explore other options in the market? And if you don't want to do that, then how do you actually negotiate? So there are kind of two approaches that are really helpful. One is an approach actually called a multiple equivalent simultaneous offer. And this is actually something that I learned about from an awesome procurement leader, 𝐥𝐤𝐬, who's just a terrific guy. And what he showed me is that oftentimes what procurement's job is to create options. At the end of the day, you want different options to potentially negotiate. And so the purpose of creating options is to create leverage in a sense, but it's also to understand what your supplier's preference is. If they're charging you more, where is that cost coming from? Is it coming from one of your requirements? Is it coming from the quantities that you're ordering it in? Is it coming from, and are those requirements potentially something that are worth taking a second look at? The second thing is should costing. So you may have heard the term fact-based.
Bid costing?
Sorry, should costing.
Should costing, yes.
And so you may have heard the term fact-based negotiation or clean sheet analysis. We're actually doing a whole roundtable on this in September, just on quantitative approaches to negotiation. And what should costing really does, and the reason that people do it, it's very complicated, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But the reason that people do it is because when you are working with an existing supplier and they know and you know that you're probably going to end up doing a deal together, you need to understand where their costs are coming from. And so you need to create price transparency so that you understand, is there a risk? Is there flexibility? Have we chosen materials that are actually just really expensive? Maybe we should look at other material options. Is this, from a go-to-market perspective, going to be something that our business team is going to be really excited about? And that's equally, I would say, as important to the engineering process, the materials and the schematic engineering process itself. So a little bit of a longer answer to the question, but strategic sourcing is absolutely involved when you have an existing supplier you're developing with an existing or long-term partner.
No, absolutely fantastic answer. I have a question from Vinay. Now the questions are flying in. I'm just running out of time of your demo, but we'll manage. Don't worry. Vinay, you want to ask your question, mate?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Dr. Muddassir, and hello, Mr. Edmund. So my question is regarding am I audible?
Yes, you are very much.
Yes. So my question is related to the monopoly of the supplier. The supplier is actually, I was in this situation. So my supplier has been approved by the customer in the aerospace, basically Rolls-Royce. So I need to go through to get the heat treatment to be done from there. And it's been a controlled process. But my challenge was to how to secure the rejection cost. If anything got happened, something wrong happened, but supplier is not willing to share the rejection price or the rejection cost. As you said, it's been controlled process. There is no chance of that. So my question is to how to secure as a customer the overall. And when you work in a just-in-time environment, when you don't have the scope for that, and it's a pretty long process.
Absolutely, and Vinay, that is absolutely a challenging situation that you're facing. What I would say is that it's important to understand why. Why are they unwilling to assume this cost? Is it because they would need to change their pricing? Is it because there are issues in their product that they're aware of? Or are there other options? Sometimes, and we've found this, is that you're putting together a bid for a service and there's a requirement that the service provider can't meet or is unwilling to meet. And it turns out that it's actually really possible to run another bid within that same process to meet that requirement. I'll give you an example. So a lot of times if you have a part that you're getting delivered in high quantity, if there are defects and they need to be returned, a supplier might not have the wherewithal to take those defects out of your inventory for one reason or another. And they might accept the cost associated with delivery, but if it impacts your manufacturing process, of course, then you have bigger problems. So one thing that's been interesting is that now, because we're seeing new categories of companies that are being created with startups and new technology, there actually are reverse logistics service providers that will actually can be added into any contract, and they can pick up the defects or pick up the returns and then provide that as a service. And so if you're facing a monopolistic situation where the business has only approved one supplier and you're trying to create leverage, think about potential other ways that you could help your supplier meet that requirement, and then explore if they'd be open to that type of partnership. Because most companies are not good at doing many things. Most companies are really only good at doing one or two things really well, and the rest they do okay. And so if this is a really important requirement for you, there might be solutions on the market that can help you get to yes.
Thanks, Vinay. Thanks, Edmund, for detailed answer.
Thank you, Edmund.
Yeah. So I think it's wow, right. I think we got about 12 minutes left for the time. The stop we have 10 o'clock. There's one more question very similar to the discussion. So gents and ladies, if you have any more questions, you can send it to me, and I will basically get you connected with Edmund. He's available on LinkedIn anyway. Please go and connect with him, and he will be happy to reply, right? So we coordinate the questions. So Edmund, I'm very keen to look into the bid ops as a solution, right? And how the study social professionals actually go about and use the tool and, measure the performance, actually improve the effectiveness and the value creation of the strategic sourcing process in general. So over to you, mate. So if you want to show.
Absolutely. So I'm going to do a pretty quick demo. Usually we take a little bit more time to kind of walk through the features. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. If you see something that catches your eye, please do reach out to me. If you go to bidops.com, you can get in touch with a member of our team. And very quickly before I go into the demo, I'm just going to tell you what makes BidOps different, because that is super important. So you heard earlier, we're a strategic sourcing platform. We also do supplier relationship management. So it's an ongoing thing. After you've gotten the contract, you can keep in touch with your suppliers through the platform and understand what they're doing and communicate with them. But we do something very, very interesting with artificial intelligence. And it's worth mentioning that before we dive in. So I mentioned that the best way to manage strategic sourcing projects is as a pipeline. So you have a pipeline of projects, you have different stages. Well, one thing that can greatly accelerate this process is communicating upfront, not just the business requirements and the service levels, but actually communicating your price expectations. And so we have an AI model that runs a simulation of a strategic sourcing process, generates many, many different scenarios, and then it, based on the competitiveness of the event, it will actually generate an intelligent first offer for every supplier and for every line item. And the value of this intelligent first offer is that it quickly and seamlessly communicates to the supplier where their quote should come in, given the business requirements they're able to meet. And so it helps get to that apples to apples comparison a lot faster. And it ultimately saves a lot of the back and forth that often happens during the process. So with that said, I'm going to dive into a demo, and you're able to see my screen here. You see I am logged into an event here. This is a sourcing event for light bulbs. I can always see, by the way, the baseline spend. If you're really focused on cost savings, it's super important to actually measure the baseline spend, because that's how you would measure savings. And by the way, if you are focused on value and you want to run a total cost of ownership analysis on your existing relationship, you can reflect that here. So you can actually see the value that you're creating beyond just the price, if you want to price out the value of the service levels or other components of the project. I want to call out that from a project management standpoint, this is really a dream for any strategic sourcing team. So you're able to do things like store documents. You can store documents for the supplier, for the buyer. You can add a non-disclosure agreement if there are sensitive materials. You can also upload drawings, schematics, art. This is unlimited file storage. You can also add an unlimited number of suppliers, and you can see them as they move through that pipeline, that sourcing process. You can see if the email was received correctly, and you can also gain insight into the organizations as a whole. So you can see who the individual bidding is, and you can also see a really useful piece of information, which is their engagement throughout the process. So this engagement score actually shows all of the different steps in the sourcing process, what the supplier bid, and even if they've submitted a quote, it shows that they actually didn't correctly spend enough time reading the requirements. So this is a signal to you that this quote might need to be reevaluated, which is really good to know early in the process, if that's the case. It also shows their approach to bidding. So it will show, are they keen to potentially offer better pricing? Are they open to exploring win-win partnerships? And this persona is actually something that helps people figure out who their best suppliers are, and then create more of these long-term win-win relationships.
Edmund, tell me again criteria of persona. How you decide?
Yeah, so the persona is based off of a supplier's response to the intelligent first offer.
Okay.
So if I go into the request format, I can create these value-based criteria. So if I go into the survey, you can see weighted criteria. I'll actually show it on a different one because this has already received responses, so they're no longer editable. But I can see in the lots and line items that you have essentially a group of line items that have the name, description. If you use SAP or another ERP system, you can also have your material group numbers as another column here, so it integrates. You'll also be able to see the unit of measure, baseline price, quantity, and this in a lot of cases will come from an S&OP process or a demand planning process where you get these numbers or estimate them, and then it can go into a sourcing cycle. So you have these different groups, and then you can actually do a preview, and you can see for a given supplier, this is what the AI has estimated the intelligent first offer should be. And by communicating this offer based off of the business requirements, it's now in the supplier's hands to accept or modify these pricing offers. And that really is what makes the process go so much faster. And it's what causes just a really kind of quick alignment around the best and final pricing for both sides. Because ultimately, this exercise, the faster it can go, the more both sides of the table can get on to collaborating on the actual production process. And so our goal here is to make it so that suppliers can get paid faster, buyers can finish projects faster, and ultimately strategic sourcing teams can deliver more value to their business partners. I'm going to call out one other feature because you might be asking yourself, well, why is this only possible now? Why wasn't this possible 5 years ago? Or why is it difficult to imagine this happening in certain contexts? And the reason is that in a lot of companies, the data is fragmented. So data is in email, it's on desktops, it's in spreadsheets connected to long email chains. It's not in one place. And what BidOps does is we actually integrate with email. And so the platform itself can send and receive emails. It could also repository files that are key to the project. So the number one way that most people distribute bids today is by blind carbon copy email. Well, that just doesn't make sense if you think about it, right? You're maintaining confidentiality by hoping that you click the right button and exactly the right. No, there's tremendous opportunity for failure. So we have a dedicated channel, request announcements, where you can create messages and share files with all of your suppliers confidentially. So you're preserving that mutual confidentiality. You have your internal discussion, so you can really communicate with the business partner. And then we have one-on-one negotiation rooms where you can upload files, answer and ask questions, and any question that a supplier asks that you want to put in an answer for everyone, it's super simple to put that question in the announcements channel and blast it out to the rest of the folks involved in the bid so that you're not answering the same question over and over again. There are, as I mentioned, a lot more useful features to the application. especially when it comes to allocation and awarding, figuring out which line item should go to which supplier. But I want to be respectful and recognize that we are coming up on time. I think just in closing, show you all the dashboard. These are the different phases that projects can move through. And just give a big thank you to Dr. Muddassir and everyone for joining.
No, just before we thank and say goodbyes, question, you mentioned the email part. I think this is very important. The whole, I mean, I remember my days as a buyer and sending RFQ with the everybody. So basically sending the email to me and then have flying copy to everybody is ridiculous. So I've done it myself. So this tool can be integrated with your Outlook emails and things like that.
Correct. Yeah.
Very nice. Excellent.
Yeah. Most people today are communicating with their supply chain through email, which is an incredibly insecure medium for managing sensitive data and business communications in general.
Absolutely.
So we encourage everyone, if they're thinking about digital transformation, get out of email, because it's what's keeping your data separated in different inboxes. And once you put your data together, you can do a lot of really interesting analysis and answer important business questions.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. There's some people are joining right now. Maybe there's some mix up in the time, in the timing. So I apologize for that, because I did send the calendar invite. There's a question from our side about what is the best method of performance measure performance in the managing sourcing. So we already answered that. Edmund already answered this question, which is about you measure the total cycle time, you measure the cost out, and we also debated that time time to market for the new product, which could be one of the sub metric for the sourcing process as general, right? So what I'm going to say is this: the recording. So the couple of folks who just joined right now, I see one named Daniel and one more person. This video will be available. It's recording right now. It will be available on SCMDOJO YouTube channel. So you just go YouTube/n/YouTube SCMDOJO. It will be available in anything between 2 to 3 weeks time. Please subscribe to the newsletter. Go to the website, subscribe to the newsletter. It will be going out to all my 27,000 email newsletter subscribers. So it will be available there. So by either subscribing to the YouTube channel or subscribing to the email newsletter, you will get the recorded copy of this episode, right? I have thoroughly enjoyed actually the whole process. For me, it's gone very fast. I'm very glad to see most people who who joined at the start have stayed over. Generally, that's a good sign. That tells me the session was the engaging session. And my job as SCMDOJO and the vision is this: try to provide as much useful information, useful content, which could be tips and tricks. And I think few things Edmund mentioned is pretty nice. I mean, I just picked a couple of things he mentioned, which I will be posting on LinkedIn. And that he mentioned our job as a procurement people is to create options. I think it's a fantastic line, and I think he mentioned about the two methods of the multiple equivalent simultaneous offer and should costing, right? So I'll actually like to learn about more on this topic, because that's something I didn't know before. So maybe we can have one more session with Edmund if he has time later on, and we can explore those more, let's call it, advanced topics. So thank you very much for your time, Edmund. Right, I really enjoyed. Very, very nice session, and I think we will hopefully we'll have you on board. Maybe 1 or 2 times if your time available in future months, if you can come and join us.
Absolutely, Dr. Muddassir. Thank you for the questions and for the great conversation, and thanks to everyone who joined and everyone who asked questions. It's been a treat.
Thank you very much. And as always, please go subscribe to the channel and bell button. So keep it simple and keep it real. Thank you very much, and have a good night and good weekend for whoever is starting tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments below.